I smelled the cheap, sickly sweet fragrance before I even reached the bedroom door. It clung to the air, fighting aggressively with the familiar, expensive scent of David's sandalwood cologne. It was the scent of a mistake, a blatant clash of cheap ambition and refined pretense. That is the smell of the precise moment your life cracks in two. There are days you wake up knowing they will be utterly unremarkable. And then there are the moments. A fleeting smell. A misplaced cup. A digital notification that redefine everything you thought you knew, slicing your timeline into a sharp before and a terrifying after. I want to know right now where this story finds you. Pause for a second. Let me know your city and the time you're listening in the comments below, because I need to feel that connection right now. I need to remember that even in the darkest corners of discovery, the world keeps spinning. My name is Sarah. For 12 years, I built a life that seemed plucked straight from a magazine cover in San Francisco. A beautiful house in the Marina District, a thriving career in architectural design, and David. David was my anchor, my rock. He was my absolute certainty. He was the kind of man who opened doors, remembered every tiny anniversary, and looked at me like I was the only masterpiece he ever wanted to study. We had the kind of marriage people envied, the kind that whispered success, stability, and unwavering fidelity. I believed in that whisper, wholeheartedly. I had absolute blinding faith in him. If you're here, it means you're looking for truth, for real stories that prove you are not alone in your chaos. Hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because you're about to hear the truth about how far trust can fall when you least expect it. I had the same misguided faith in Jessica, our neighbor. She was more than just the woman next door. She was my running buddy, the person who watered my plants when we traveled, the one I shared wine with on Tuesday evenings, complaining about the difficulty of maintaining a perfect yard in the aggressive California sun. We were a comfortable quartet: David, myself, Jessica, and her husband, Mark. Our lives were interwoven, our routines predictable. That predictability was my cage, though I didn't know it then. I was swimming in the luxury of routine. Every morning, David left precisely at 7:30 a.m., suit pressed, briefcase in hand, kissing me goodbye with the exact same pressure on my lips he'd used for over a decade. Every afternoon, I'd wave to Jessica as she walked her dog, exchanging casual pleasantries about weekend plans. It was all so safe, so meticulously constructed. The foundation was flawless, or so I thought. The shifts, when they began, were subtle, like the quiet settling of dust after an earthquake. You barely notice the cracks until the entire structure gives way. He started working later. Not just an extra hour, but hours that bled into 9 or 10 at night, usually accompanied by an overly detailed explanation about a merger or a critical client presentation. These explanations were too perfect, too rehearsed. If I asked a follow-up question, a faint flicker of annoyance would cross his face, quickly masked by a loving yet dismissive smile. His phone became an extension of his body. It used to sit carelessly on the kitchen island, charging. Now, it was always face down on the counter, often vibrating silently with notifications he would dismiss with a practiced swipe and a quick mumbled, "Just work, honey." If I picked it up to check the time, he would materialize immediately, leaning over my shoulder, ostensibly to make coffee, but really to ensure I didn't see the screen. Then there was the nervousness. He was jumpy, irritable. He stopped sleeping soundly. Sometimes I'd wake up to find him staring at the ceiling, his jaw tight. When I asked what was wrong, he'd just sigh, pull me close in a perfunctory hug, and blame the immense pressure at the firm. The physical intimacy waned too. The small, almost imperceptible flinches when I tried to hold his hand during a movie, or the way he suddenly developed a habit of showering immediately when he got home, saying the city smelled dirty and he needed to wash the day off. I was busy smoothing the wrinkles out of our perfect life, refusing to look at the wrinkles forming on his conscience. I was so arrogant in my certainty, so sure that our story was different, that we were above the common melodrama of infidelity. I convinced myself that the exhaustion, the distance, the obsession with his phone, it all stemmed from his professional drive. I was his supportive, understanding wife, giving him space, trusting him implicitly. I lived with that gnawing anxiety for 3 months, ignoring the red flags, painting them white with rationalizations. But then came the day the universe decided I needed a sign, a physical push out of my blissful ignorance. The day I canceled my afternoon meetings and decided to drive home 2 hours earlier than scheduled. I didn't go home because of a sudden premonition. I went home because I needed a specific printed document that I knew I had left on my desk. A physical contract crucial for an early morning pitch. The digital copy simply wouldn't suffice. I was annoyed by the inconvenience, not suspicious. The house was only a 20-minute drive away, and as I turned the corner onto our quiet, oak-lined street, I noticed something immediately out of place. Jessica's car was parked directly in front of our mailbox. Her usual spot was 2 houses down, in front of her own driveway. My first thought was that she must have dropped off something for me, maybe a cake pan or a mail package she'd signed for. But then I noticed the empty space in her own driveway. Where was Mark? And why was her car still here? I pulled into the garage, the automatic door sliding down behind me with a heavy thud that echoed in the sudden silence. Usually the house was empty at this time, waiting patiently for my return. But this afternoon, the silence felt different. It felt heavy, expectant, like a held breath. And then I smelled it again, stronger now, clinging to the entryway air. That cheap, sweet perfume. It was overpowering, sickeningly aggressive, battling David's expensive cologne to a bitter standstill. And I knew, with a dreadful crystalline clarity that shattered my 12 years of certainty, that I was not alone. The migraine hit me like a physical blow, a sudden blinding spike behind my left eye that made the fluorescent office lights unbearable. It wasn't planned. I was supposed to be sitting through the quarterly budget, review until 5, but the pain was so intense, so immediate, that I simply told my assistant I was heading home for the medication I kept in the master bathroom. I needed silence, darkness, and 2 specific pills that were nowhere near my purse. That excruciating, unexpected pain was the only reason I deviated from my routine that day. The only reason I walked into the carefully constructed lie we called our life an hour and a half too early. I closed the front door with, excruciating care, the usual click sounding like a gunshot in the heavy stillness of the house. The scent of that cheap, sickeningly sweet perfume was no longer a hint. It was a suffocating cloud. And David's Jaguar, it was definitely in the garage. He always took the express train for meetings downtown. Always. My briefcase felt heavy, useless. My heart had stopped beating in the normal rhythm. It was hammering out a desperate Morse code against my ribs. Logic vanished. All. That remained was a cold, demanding certainty. I didn't take off my coat. I didn't drop the briefcase. I moved through the foyer, past the living room where we had hosted Sunday brunches, toward the stairs. Every sound amplified, the faint buzz of the central air, the slight squeak of the 10th step, the ragged sound of my own breath. I was moving toward a catastrophe, but I couldn't stop. I felt detached, watching myself in slow motion, an unwilling spectator to the end of my world. The second floor was unnervingly silent. The blinds were drawn in the master bedroom, which was unusual for midday. I stopped outside the heavy oak door. I didn't knock. I didn't whisper his name. There was no need. The sound was audible, faint, but undeniable. a muffled, rhythmic sound that was not the television, not the radio, and certainly not the sound of a man working from home. My hand found the doorknob. It was cold. I took a breath deep enough to steady myself, not for emotion, but for action. I turned the knob slowly, pushing the door inward just enough to create a sliver of darkness, a vertical gap that allowed me to view the scene without alerting the occupants. What I saw was not a passionate moment of spontaneous human weakness. It was a filthy, comfortable arrangement. David, my husband, the man who swore eternal fidelity in front of 300 guests, and beside him, tangled in the high thread count sheets I had picked out, was Melanie. Melanie, our next-door neighbor, the one who borrowed sugar and swapped parenting tips with me over coffee on Tuesday mornings. Her face, flushed and vacant, was tilted toward the ceiling. David looked relaxed, not guilty, just entitled. The betrayal wasn't in the act itself. That was just mechanics. The true wound was the sheer banality of their comfort, the way they had contaminated the most sacred space in my life with their casual, cheap deceit. The shock was so immense, so physical, that it didn't register as rage or despair first. It registered as icy, clinical clarity. Screaming would achieve nothing but hysterics, tears, and a weakened legal position. I needed evidence. Unassailable proof. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone, maneuvering the silent settings with practiced ease. My hands were rock steady, moving with a precision I usually reserved for boardroom presentations. I opened the camera, switched to video, and silently positioned the phone against the doorframe, letting the lens capture the whole scene. I let it record for a full minute, documenting their identities, the location, the nature of their activity. I needed to ensure that no lawyer could argue, she said, he said, later. That this wasn't merely a misunderstanding or a fleeting moment. This was a sustained, intentional mockery of my life. When I had secured enough footage, I pulled the phone back, my fingers trembling slightly now that the immediate task was done. I didn't slam the door. I simply pushed it shut, allowing the heavy door to settle back into its frame with a soft, decisive thud. They didn't even flinch. I walked backward, silently, down the hall and into the small, rarely used guest bedroom at the end of the wing. I locked the door and slid down the wall, finally allowing myself a shuddering breath. I looked at the phone in my hand, the damning video clip already uploaded to the cloud. Redundancy was key. Now, who else deserved to see this perfect picture of suburban decay? Melanie's husband, Robert, was a sweet man, quiet, dedicated, and utterly devoted to his family. He drove a minivan, coached soccer, and genuinely seemed to adore Melanie. He was at work, probably in a tedious meeting just like the one I had escaped. He was the co-victim, the forgotten variable in David and Melanie's tawdry equation. I needed to strike before David could put on his clothes and craft his inevitable lie. My finger hovered over Robert's contact information. This wasn't revenge. This was operational necessity. We were both standing in the wreckage of our marriages, and only together could we ensure maximum tactical advantage. I clicked his name, raising the phone to my ear. The line rang twice, 3 times. Robert answered with a cheerful, slightly rushed professional tone. "Robert, it's Amelia," I said, my voice shockingly devoid of emotion, a dull, flat monotone that betrayed none of the seismic destruction happening 20 feet away. "I apologize for calling you at work, but I need you to come home immediately. I have photographic evidence of David and Melanie in my bed. And trust me, you are going to want to see this before David tries to dispose of the proof." The silence on the other end was absolute, a void where a man's life had just been erased. "Don't call Melanie. Just tell your secretary you have a family emergency and drive straight here. We need to talk strategy." My head was splitting, a jackhammer behind my eyes that no amount of over-the-counter painkiller could touch. I had to leave the quarterly board meeting early, apologizing profusely for the sudden departure. I told Sarah, my assistant, that if I didn't get home to a dark room and a prescription pill immediately, I'd probably pass out on the conference table. That searing, beautiful pain, the kind that makes you physically sick, was my unlikely savior. It was just past 2 p.m. when I pulled my car into the driveway of the house that represented everything I thought I had built. The first sign that something was terribly wrong wasn't a noise, but a visual dissonance. David's heavy black Escalade was parked at an odd, urgent angle, partially blocking the walkway. He had told me he was driving out to a remote construction site near Austin that day, claiming he wouldn't be back until late. I frowned, chalking it up momentarily to a change of schedule, perhaps a forgotten laptop. I unlocked the front door, the silence inside the large house unnerving. Usually, even during the day, there was the low hum of the smart home system, or the soft sounds of a neighbor's dog barking, but now, only dead air. And then, the smell hit me. It wasn't his expensive cedar cologne, the one I had given him last Christmas. It was sickeningly sweet, a cloying floral gardenia that was instantly, offensively recognizable. It was Melanie's perfume, the cheap, overpowering fragrance she always wore, drowning herself in it the way some people drown their anxieties in alcohol. My migraine instantly vanished, replaced by a cold, surgical clarity. My blood didn't run cold. It boiled and distilled into pure, concentrated fury. I started climbing the grand oak staircase, each step a calculated ascent into a new reality. I didn't rush. I didn't allow my heart to pound visibly. I was moving through an underwater dream, observing the details with detached precision. The muffled sound started as I reached the landing. A rhythmic squeak. A low, hurried murmur. They were in our master bedroom. My master bedroom. The room we had decorated together, where we had promised forever, where I folded his shirts just this morning. I paused outside the heavy double doors. For 1 second, I inhaled deeply, cataloging the metallic tang of fear mixed with that awful gardenia in the air. This was the point of no return. I didn't need to knock. I didn't need to announce the end of my life. I turned the brass knob slowly, deliberately, giving them no warning. The scene was not a discovery. It was an explosion. A shocking tableau of primal, unadulterated disrespect, framed by my custom silk sheets. There they were, a tangle of limbs, sweat, and shame. Melanie, with her pale skin flushed red, her eyes wide and staring, partially obscured by the cascade of her cheap, dyed blonde hair. David, my husband, the man who preached integrity and fidelity. His face contorted in a mask of fleeting pleasure that instantly snapped into sheer, paralyzing horror when he saw me standing in the doorway. There was no sound from me, no scream, no gasp, no tearing of clothes or throwing of objects. That reaction was beneath me. That was the reaction they expected from the hysterical wife. I was not hysterical. I was a strategist, and I was holding the camera. I raised my phone immediately, the lens focused with deadly accuracy. The silence was punctuated only by the rapid, frantic gasping of 2 people caught in the act. I took 3 photographs and 2 short video clips. I captured the state of the room, the discarded clothes, Melanie's tacky purple dress draped over my chaise lounge, and their absolutely unmistakable faces of guilt. David started to move, trying to cover himself, trying to lunge off the bed, but I held up a single warning hand, cold and steady. "Don't move," I stated, my voice low and flat, stripped of all emotion, sounding like a machine delivering bad news. "The evidence is already secured." I didn't stay to watch their pathetic scramble. My next move was tactical. I took 2 steps backward, closing the heavy oak door firmly behind me. I heard them whispering frantically, inside, realizing they were trapped. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the small brass key I kept for emergencies, and turned the lock in the door with a satisfying, final click. They were contained. The scene was preserved. I walked down the hallway to the guest bedroom, my own home feeling like a crime scene, and sat on the edge of the bed. My fingers flew across the screen, my mind racing through the legal strategy. David wouldn't get away with minimizing this, not after I secured the visual proof. But I needed an ally, someone who was suffering the same seismic destruction 20 feet away. I scrolled through my contacts and found Daniel's number, Melanie's husband. He was the next victim, and soon he would be my co-conspirator. I took a deep breath, the gardenia scent finally fading as I focused on the task. "Daniel," I began, my tone professional, controlled, almost bored. "I apologize for calling you at work, but I need you to come home immediately. I have photographic evidence of David and Melanie in my bed. And trust me, you are going to want to see this before David tries to dispose of the proof." The silence on the other end was absolute, a void where a man's life had just been erased. "Don't call Melanie," I instructed, my voice unwavering. "Just tell your secretary you have a family emergency and drive straight here. We need to talk strategy." The bank meeting had been moved up, and I realized, halfway across downtown Los Angeles, that the crucial portfolio presentation was sitting right on David's mahogany desk, where I had left it the night before. I cursed the distraction, signaled a sharp U-turn, and headed back toward the quiet, tree-lined street we called home. It was barely 2 in the afternoon. David should have been across town finalizing the Smith contract, and Melanie, our neighbor and my supposed confidant, was usually at her pottery class until 5. This was a quick grab-and-go mission, an annoying detour into the false security of midday domesticity. But as I pulled into the driveway, the familiar silhouette of David's sleek black sedan, the one he swore was too important to drive for simple errands, sat squarely in the garage. My stomach clenched, not yet with suspicion, but with confusion. Why was he home? Was he sick? I parked my car quietly on the street, a habit I'd developed to avoid blocking him in, and let myself in through the side door. The air inside the house was unnervingly heavy. It wasn't the silence of an empty home, it was the suffocating absence of sound that follows an intense activity. The air conditioning was blasting, making the atmosphere chill, but a strange, cloying warmth clung to the hallway. And then I smelled it. It wasn't the sandalwood and citrus scent David preferred. This was sweet, floral, almost synthetic. The sickeningly familiar aroma of the expensive French perfume Melanie always wore. I didn't call out. I didn't drop the car keys. Every nerve ending went instantly cold, prioritizing survival over hysteria. I moved through the foyer, past the living room bathed in cold sunlight, feeling the silence amplify the relentless pounding in my ears. My feet seemed to float up the pristine white marble stairs. Each step was a decision, a point of no return. I was the architect of my own disaster, climbing steadily toward the truth. The door to the master suite was slightly ajar. A thin strip of white light cut across the dark wood floor. I paused, flattening myself against the wall, taking one deep, shuddering breath that did nothing to quell the earthquake happening beneath my ribs. I reached out a hand, placed it on the cool brass handle, and pushed the door inward, just enough to see. The world shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces, not with noise, but with color. It was the sight of my white silk comforter, rumpled into an obscene mound, that hit me first, then the tangle of limbs, pale against the dark blue accent wall. David's jacket was tossed carelessly over the chaise lounge, and next to it, the unmistakable, vibrant red dress that Melanie had worn to our last dinner party. They hadn't even bothered to close the door fully. They were caught in the act of erasing the last decade of my life, their faces contorted in expressions of selfish, oblivious pleasure. I didn't scream. I didn't weep. I didn't even drop the portfolio I had come back for. The shock was so profound it short-circuited every emotional response. Instead of collapsing, I became a machine. My hand, steady as a surgeon's, reached for my phone, slipped it off silent mode, and activated the camera. I took 3 quick high-definition photographs, careful to capture the distinct tattoo on David's shoulder and the unique silver bracelet on Melanie's wrist. Proof. Irrefutable, time-stamped proof. The adrenaline that flooded my veins wasn't rage. It was crystal clear, strategic focus. David, oblivious to the fact that his entire future was being documented from 3 feet away, mumbled something I didn't care to hear. I withdrew the phone slowly, closing the door as softly as a feather settling on the ground. The click of the latch was the only sound I allowed myself. I walked straight across the hall to the guest room, sat down on the edge of the bed, and stared at the photographs until the details were burned into my memory. This was not a moment for confrontation. This was a moment for leverage. David and Melanie were not just destroying my marriage, they were destroying Melanie's marriage to Mark, a man who worked at the firm that controlled half of David's investment portfolio. I located Mark's contact information, took another steadying breath, and made the call. I didn't offer pleasantries. I didn't use euphemisms. I didn't let the bitterness taint the cold efficiency of the delivery. I told him precisely what I had seen, who it was with, and where they were right now. I apologize for calling you at work, Mark, but I need you to come home immediately, I stated, my voice unwavering, devoid of any weakness. I have photographic evidence of David and Melanie in my bed. And trust me, you are going to want to see this before David tries to dispose of the proof. The silence on the other end was absolute, a void where a man's life had just been erased. He didn't question me. He didn't rage. He was processing the seismic shift in his reality. Don't call Melanie, I instructed, laying the foundation for our alliance. Just tell your secretary you have a family emergency and drive straight here. We need to talk strategy. This isn't about heartbreak, Mark. This is about business, ownership, and ensuring they both pay for their collusion. I hung up, placing the phone on the nightstand. My heart was still hammering, but the panic had subsided, replaced by a deep, icy resolve. The game had changed. I was no longer the unsuspecting wife. I was the one holding the evidence, the key, and the moral high ground. And I was about to use all of it to rebuild my life, piece by meticulous piece, starting with the immediate, devastating eviction of the 2 people currently defiling my marital bed. David and Melanie thought they were enjoying a quick, reckless afternoon. They had no idea they were setting the stage for their own downfall. The morning had started normally, too normally perhaps. David had kissed me goodbye, mentioning a crucial afternoon meeting with a new client. I was heading to my downtown office, preparing for a long day finalizing the paperwork for the refinancing of our house in Scottsdale. I was already halfway across town, stuck in the usual mid-morning traffic gridlock, when I realized the horrifying mistake. The original loan documents, signed and dated, were sitting right there, on the corner of my desk at home, where I'd left them last night. Without those physical copies, the entire closing appointment would be a wasted trip. Frustration tightened my chest. I cursed the universe and executed a sharp U-turn, abandoning the idea of calling David. He was supposedly already in his meeting and couldn't help. I just needed 30 minutes. Maximum. In and out. The drive back felt strangely weighted. As I pulled into our quiet suburban street, the first flicker of true unease hit me. David's black SUV was in the driveway. Immediately, my mind launched into rationalizations. Maybe his meeting was canceled. Maybe he had a quick call and came home to work in peace. But the way the SUV was parked, a little too hastily, slightly angled, felt wrong. I killed the engine and the silence of the Arizona afternoon pressed in, heavy and artificial. The front door was unlocked, which was odd, as David was meticulous about security. "Honey? David? Are you here?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the foyer. No answer. Just the muted, distant hum of the refrigerator. As I stepped inside, the air shifted. It wasn't the clean smell of linen and expensive detergent I usually associated with our home. It was sharp, floral, and deeply synthetic. A cheap, overpowering perfume that definitely wasn't mine. I knew that sickeningly sweet lilac scent. Melanie always wore it. I didn't panic yet. I ascended the stairs, gripping the mahogany railing. The silence was deafening, the kind of silence that screams. With every step, a terrible certainty solidified in my gut, cold and hard as granite. I reached the landing. The door to our master bedroom was slightly ajar. I pushed the door open just enough for my eyes to register the scene. My breath caught, snagging painfully in my throat. It wasn't the visual that struck me first. It was the profound, instantaneous violation of every promise, every whispered assurance of our decade together. David was there, and Melanie was with him. They were entangled in the very center of our king-sized bed, surrounded by the crumpled ivory sheets I had painstakingly chosen. His hand was resting carelessly on her back, the same hand that had held mine during my father's funeral, the same hand that had slipped the wedding band onto my finger. He was smiling that lazy, self-satisfied smile, the one I used to find charming. Melanie's head snapped up when the door creaked. Her eyes, wide and terrified, locked onto mine. The color drained from her face, leaving her features skeletal. David followed her gaze, his expression transitioning instantly from lust to absolute, horrifying dread. For a single, eternal second, the world tilted, the sound rushing out of my ears. My first instinct was primal: scream, throw something, collapse. But the moment their sheer, ugly betrayal registered, the absolute audacity of doing this in my sanctuary, a strange calm descended. It wasn't forgiveness. It was pure, surgical rage. I didn't utter a word. I didn't slam the door. I reached into my purse, my fingers finding the solid, familiar glass of my phone. I activated the camera, the flash mercifully off, the red recording light blinking silently in the dimly lit room. I filmed them. I zoomed in just enough to capture their faces, their state of undress, the horrifying reality of my best friend and my husband. David started scrambling, trying to pull the sheet up, stammering apologies already tainted with self-preservation. "Wait, Sarah. It's not what you think." Oh, but it was exactly what I thought. I kept the lens steady, my hand unshakable. The recording took perhaps 30 seconds, but it felt like a lifetime of accumulating evidence. When I had what I needed, I backed out slowly, maintaining eye contact with Melanie, whose silence was the loudest confession of all. I didn't need to stay and debate the semantics of infidelity. I had the proof. I closed the bedroom door quietly, a gentle click that sounded like the closing of a coffin lid on my former life. I didn't go downstairs immediately. I walked quickly to the linen closet at the end of the hall, grabbed a thick rope I used for securing boxes, and looped it around the handles of the master bedroom door, tying a tight, industrial knot. They were trapped. Not permanently, but long enough for me to make the next necessary calls. My hands were shaking now, a delayed tremor of adrenaline, but my mind was laser-focused. I walked downstairs to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stared at the granite countertop, grounding myself in the physical reality of the house that was still mine. I opened my phone again. The first call wasn't to David's office or even to my attorney. That could wait 5 minutes. The first call was to Robert, Melanie's Robert. The phone rang twice before he answered, his voice cheerful, slightly muffled. "Hey, Sarah, everything okay? You sound a little rushed." I took a deep breath, letting the icy resolve solidify my voice. "Robert," I began, cutting straight through the pleasantries. "I need you to sit down. You need to come to my house right now. No questions, no warnings. Just drive over immediately and don't tell Melanie you're coming. I have something you need to see. It involves David. And your wife." There was a long, terrible silence on the line, the sound of a man trying desperately to fit two seemingly disconnected puzzle pieces together. Finally, he whispered, "Sarah, what did they do?" "They destroyed everything, Robert," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "And right now, they're enjoying the consequences of their actions locked inside my bedroom. Bring your keys. We're changing the locks today." The stage was set. The perfect life was shattered, but the architect of the reconstruction was ready to work. It was purely routine, a tiny logistical hiccup that rerouted my entire destiny. I had been halfway to the client's office in downtown Denver when I realized the crucial red binder, the one containing the signed non-disclosure agreements for the merger, was still sitting innocently on the granite kitchen island. It was too important to risk sending a junior staffer, and too valuable to trust to an unsecured courier. A 15-minute detour was all it would take. Pulling my Mercedes into the driveway, I noticed Daniel's car, his old reliable black SUV. That was odd. He had a supposedly grueling all-day golf luncheon with potential investors down in Colorado Springs. I frowned, instantly justifying it. Maybe he forgot his phone charger. Maybe he just stopped by to grab a quick file. This was the danger of absolute trust, wasn't it? It trained your brain to rationalize away the impossible. The silence that met me when I turned the key in the lock was profound. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of an empty house. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of something trapped. I stood in the foyer, my senses screaming a warning that my rational mind refused to acknowledge. And then the scent hit me. It was sharp, saccharine, and completely alien. It smelled like cheap jasmine and desperation, clashing violently with the subtle, expensive vanilla candle I always kept burning. I walked toward the staircase, each step on the pristine oak seeming to amplify the hammering of my own heart. The red binder lay forgotten on the counter. My focus had narrowed entirely to the second floor, to the closed door of our master suite. I could hear nothing now, but I could feel the tension, a palpable, sticky heat radiating down the hallway. The master bedroom door was cracked open, maybe an inch, just enough for a strip of light to escape. I didn't knock. I didn't announce myself. My hand, steady and cold, pushed the heavy door inward. The world shattered into a million soundless pieces. It was Daniel, my husband of 12 years, the man who pledged forever beneath the Rocky Mountain peaks. And it was Cynthia. Cynthia, my neighbor, the woman I had just texted about swapping zucchini, bread recipes, her cheap bright pink summer dress a discarded puddle of color on the floor. They froze, tangled in the ruins of my life, their faces contorted into masks of pure animal terror. The shock didn't register as pain, not initially. It registered as a profound, chilling clarity. There was no sound from me, no primal scream. That kind of noise was reserved for the weak. I was standing in the middle of a crime scene, and my first instinct, honed by years in corporate litigation, was to collect evidence. My hand, miraculously steady, reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't lower my gaze from the spectacle of their naked betrayal. I walked 3 deliberate steps further into the room, ensuring the full, undeniable panorama was captured. The phone's camera was on. The red recording light glowed, a silent witness more powerful than any scream. Their wide, panicked eyes followed the lens. I recorded the bed, their faces, the discarded clothes, the intimate placement of their bodies in the space built for our marriage. I filmed every single damning detail until I was satisfied. When I finished, I didn't turn off the camera. I simply stopped recording, put the phone back in my pocket, and slowly backed out of the room. Their desperate, whispered pleadings started instantly, a torrent of pathetic excuses. "Sarah, wait. It wasn't—" Daniel began, trying to rise. I didn't let him finish. I slammed the heavy door shut, reached for the skeleton key, the spare that hung on the hook behind the linen closet, and twisted the lock with a vicious, satisfying click. They were trapped. Their muffled shouts and pounding on the wood instantly became irrelevant noise. I leaned against the cool wall for a single silent moment, breathing in the polluted air of their deceit, and felt a surge of cold, focused power. The architect of the reconstruction was ready to work. I walked directly to the window, watching Cynthia's husband, Robert, meticulously trimming his rose bushes next door. Poor, oblivious Robert. He was just as much a victim as I was. He needed to be brought into the fold, not as an ally seeking revenge, but as a co-signatory to the destruction of their shared nightmare. I descended the stairs, grabbed the neglected red binder, and retrieved my phone. I scrolled to Robert's number and hit dial. It rang twice. "Robert, it's Sarah," I said, my voice absolutely flat, devoid of the warmth we usually shared. "I need you to come over, right now." He chuckled nervously. "Everything okay? You sound serious." "I am serious, Robert," I continued, pacing the length of the living room, the Persian rug suddenly feeling like enemy territory. "I found Daniel and Cynthia together. They are currently locked inside my master bedroom. Do you understand what I am telling you?" There was a long, agonizing silence on the line, the sound of a man trying desperately to fit two seemingly disconnected puzzle pieces together. Finally, he whispered, "Sarah, what did they do?" "They destroyed everything, Robert," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "And right now, they're enjoying the consequences of their actions locked inside my bedroom. Bring your keys. We're changing the locks today." The stage was set. The perfect life was shattered, but the architect of the reconstruction was ready to work. I hung up the phone with Robert, the weight of the receiver feeling strangely light in my hand. He was coming. He understood. That cold clarity I felt wasn't rage. It was operational necessity. I looked down at the screen of my mobile, where the damning video loop was still playing. A silent confirmation of the moment that had cleaved my life into before and after. The evidence was secure, the ally was mobilized, and the trap was perfectly set. I had only been gone for 3 hours. I was supposed to be in a crucial meeting downtown, coordinating the final details for the new investment portfolio. But the universe, or perhaps my subconscious, had intervened. A sudden, crippling migraine, the kind that makes the world tilt and sound pierce your bones, forced me to abandon the afternoon. I didn't call Ethan. I merely texted my assistant, apologized for bailing, and drove straight back to our quiet, sun-drenched street in suburban Dallas, craving only the darkness of our bedroom and a handful of extra-strength painkillers. Pulling into the driveway, I saw Ethan's sleek black SUV parked carelessly near the curb. Odd. He had a site inspection hours away near the coast. Maybe he forgot his laptop. Maybe the inspection was canceled. I dismissed the slight irregularity, focused only on the throbbing behind my eyes. I closed the front door gently, trying to preserve the silence, but the house itself felt wrong. It was too silent. That heavy, unnatural quiet that only blankets a house when it is concealing something momentous. Then I smelled it. not the faint cedar and clean linen of my usual home scent. This was heavy, cloying, cheap. A sickly, sweet floral balm that cut through the pain in my head like a physical blow. It was Lisa's signature scent. Lisa, our neighbor, my supposed confidant, the woman I had trusted to water my plants and watch my dog. Dread, cold and sharp, instantly replaced the migraine. I stopped dead at the bottom of the stairs, my hand instinctively reaching for the phone in my pocket. I moved slowly, deliberately, as if wading through thick water. The carpeted staircase muffled my steps, but I still held my breath. Upstairs, the silence was broken only by a soft, rhythmic sound. Not talking, not music. Something intimate, something sickeningly familiar that made my stomach revolt. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, just enough to see the sliver of light spilling onto the mahogany hallway floor. I didn't need to push the door open to know what I would find. I pushed the door inward just enough to see the full scene. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was worse. It was sickeningly comfortable, practiced. My beautiful, expensive Egyptian cotton sheets were a crumpled monument to their betrayal. Ethan was there, his back mostly to me, his hand resting possessively on the smooth, pale shoulder of the woman, beneath him. And she was, of course, Lisa. The light caught the shine of their sweat, the careless discard of their clothing on the floor, and worst of all, the casual, easy intimacy of their shared silence, broken only by a few shallow breaths. My wedding ring, the one he insisted on never removing, glinted mockingly on the bedside table, next to a half-empty glass of water. The world didn't spin. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The physical pain of the migraine vanished, replaced by a clarity so absolute it felt like a surgical incision. Every emotion, the rage, the grief, the sheer physical nausea, was instantly channeled into one single functional thought: evidence. My phone was already in my hand. I quietly raised it, held my breath, and started recording. I moved the camera slowly, capturing the room, Ethan's startled face when he finally registered the silent figure in the doorway, and Lisa's immediate, paralyzing horror. I recorded the eye, rings, the clothes, the whole ugly tableau. When I knew the evidence was undeniable, I lowered the phone, took one steadying breath, and without saying a word, I stepped back, pulled the heavy door shut, and turned the lock. That click was the sound of my old life dying. Ethan started pounding on the door instantly, his voice muffled and thick with panic. "Sarah, for God's sake, open the door, let me explain." I ignored him. I walked straight out to the front hall, my heart hammering a triumphant rhythm against my ribs. I bypassed the kitchen and went into my study, locking that door too, needing a soundproof barrier. I sat at my desk, the recording still playing silently on my phone screen, watching the proof of my freedom while Ethan's frantic shouts continued from the hallway. I pulled up Robert's number again, even though I had just ended the call confirming his immediate departure for my house. I needed to solidify the next steps, the legal, scaffolding, before the adrenaline wore off and the grief hit. This was the moment I cemented the alliance. "Robert, listen to me closely," I instructed, my voice a low, hard monotone, devoid of the tremor of fear or sadness. "They are locked inside. Do not, under any circumstances, try to talk to Lisa. You meet me at the front door. I have already called my locksmith, Michael. He will be here in 15 minutes. We are changing every single lock in this house, starting with the bedroom and the front door. Bring your spare house key and every document you have, proving ownership of your joint accounts." I didn't ask him if he was okay. I didn't offer comfort. Comfort was irrelevant now. We were soldiers in a shared war, and the first battle was the seizure of territory. "I'm 10 minutes away, Sarah," Robert replied, his voice still shaking, but now infused with a surprising steel. "What about the police?" "Not yet," I said, watching the video loop of Ethan trying to pull on his discarded jeans. "The police complicate the divorce proceedings unnecessarily. This needs to be surgical, Robert. Quiet. When you arrive, wait outside. Do not engage. We will meet Michael, and we will take back what is ours." I ended the call. They had destroyed everything, but in their carelessness, they had given me the blueprint for the demolition. I held the keys to the kingdom, literally, because I had just locked them inside. The perfect life was shattered, but the architect of the reconstruction was ready to work. Ethan continued to scream my name, but I couldn't hear him over the satisfying silence of my own focused intent. The game had changed, and I was holding all the cards. I was halfway to the downtown office tower in Chicago when the professional panic hit me. Not the visceral fear of a wife, but the sharp dread of an executive who has made a critical error. The merger contracts, the signed copies, needed for the 9 a.m. meeting, were still sitting exactly where I'd left them, right on the mahogany desk in my home office. It was a rookie mistake, something I hadn't done in years, but a necessity now. I checked my watch. I had 30 minutes to retrieve them and somehow beat the rush hour traffic back. I called Ethan, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Typical. He had mentioned leaving before sunrise for an all-day conference, cursing the traffic and my own distraction. I swung the car around and sped back toward our quiet, tree-lined street in Hinsdale. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something immediately unsettling. Ethan's black SUV was already backed into the garage. Strange. He should be miles away, starting his keynote address. I immediately rationalized it. Maybe he'd forgotten his laptop and decided to work from home instead of fighting the city gridlock. I tried the front door. It was unlocked. The house was too quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of an empty home, but the unnatural, absorbent silence of a place holding its breath. I called out, "Ethan, I'm back for a minute." No answer. I walked past the immaculate living room, heading for the stairs, when I caught it. A scent. It wasn't my light, citrusy morning perfume, nor the clean, woodsy aftershave Ethan preferred. This was heavy, overtly floral, almost cloying. It was unmistakable. Chloe. Our next-door neighbor, Chloe's signature scent. She always drowned herself in that expensive, sickly sweet fragrance. My stomach tightened into a knot of cold steel, but my brain, ever the loyal servant, tried desperately to offer innocent explanations. Maybe she had dropped off a dish. Maybe she was borrowing a ladder. Maybe the cleaner had worn it. The lies were flimsy, already tearing at the edges. I forced myself up the spiral staircase, my feet suddenly feeling leaden, disconnected from the smooth, marble steps. The air grew thicker with the perfume the higher I went. The door to our master bedroom was slightly ajar, casting a sliver of shadow across the carpet. I stopped breathing, listening with a terrifying focus. From the hall, I could see the edge of the large, custom-made sleigh bed. Then I heard it. A low, unfamiliar sound. A muffled laugh, quickly stifled. The innocent excuses dissolved instantly, replaced by a cold, sharp certainty that sliced through the entire decade of my perfect life. I pushed the door open just enough to see clearly. They were there. Ethan, my husband, and Chloe, the woman whose children I baked cookies for, tangled together in the sunlight streaming through our bay window. They weren't scrambling. They weren't shocked yet. They were simply there, draped in a state of profound, sickening contentment. His hand was resting casually on her shoulder, his face turned toward hers. It wasn't the frantic, messy violence of lust that struck me. It was the casual, settled comfort. They looked like they belonged there. The air rushed out of me, but I made no sound. The shock wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, petrifying process, hardening me from the inside out. I felt a transformation happening in real time. The weeping woman evaporated, replaced by the calculating executive. My hands, however, were still functional. I didn't yell. I didn't drop the briefcase holding the $1 million contracts. I didn't cry. The instinct to rage, to make a scene, was overridden by a sudden, terrifying clarity. Screaming would only give them the chance to panic and cover up. I needed proof. Rock-solid, irrefutable evidence for the settlement I was about to file. I pulled out my phone, activated the video camera, and held it steady, my hand miraculously devoid of tremor. I recorded the angle of the room, the disarray of the bed, and zoomed in just enough to confirm the identities of the two people who had just vaporized the foundation of my life. After 10 excruciating seconds of filming, I slowly backed away from the door, pulling it gently shut. The loud metallic click of the lock, which I engaged from the outside using the key I always carried, sounded deafening in the hallway silence. They were trapped. Not physically forever, but trapped by the reality I had just captured. I leaned against the cool wall, inhaling the sickening sweetness of Chloe's perfume, letting the strategic ice settle into my veins. I walked down the stairs, retrieved the contracts from the desk, and placed them securely in my briefcase. I was still focused, still functional. The merger meeting was still on the calendar. But first, I had one urgent call to make. I pulled the contact for Liam, Chloe's husband, from my list. Liam, my friend, my confidant in many neighborly barbecues, the man who trusted his wife and my husband, implicitly. I stepped onto the front porch, breathed the clean morning air, and pressed the call button. When Liam answered, his voice cheerful and unsuspecting, asking about my big meeting, I didn't mince words. "Liam," I said, my voice steady and low, devoid of emotion. "I need you to come to my house immediately. Do not call Chloe. Do not call Ethan. Just drive here right now. I have something you need to see. Something that involves both of them, and it's happening upstairs in my locked bedroom." The cheerful tone vanished, replaced by a strained silence that hung heavier than any silence I had known before. "What are you talking about, Sarah?" he finally whispered, the horror already creeping into his throat. "I'm talking about betrayal, Liam. I'm talking about a secret they kept, and it just ended. Come now. We have a shared problem and we need to deal with it together, legally and decisively. Bring your house keys. I've just filed for divorce, and we need to exchange some locks today." I remember the pounding. It wasn't the sound of a looming crisis yet. It was just a dull, rhythmic hammering behind my eyes. I had been scheduled for back-to-back meetings downtown, a long day requiring sharp focus. But by 2 p.m., the light was too bright, the voices too loud, and the nascent tension headache had bloomed into a cruel, incapacitating migraine. I had never been one to abandon work, but this pain was beyond managing. I called my assistant, canceled the rest of the day, and started the drive back to our quiet, tree-lined street in Seattle, needing nothing more than darkness and silence. The first sign that the silence I craved was not the silence I would receive was the sight of Mark's black SUV. It was parked haphazardly in the driveway, not tucked neatly into the garage where it usually rested during the workday. He was supposed to be at the Regional Sales Conference 70, miles away, a trip he had meticulously planned since Tuesday. A sharp, ugly spike of concern rose. Had he fallen ill too? I used my key, stepping into the cool, silent foyer. The house was too quiet. Not the comforting quiet of an empty home, but a charged, muted silence that felt heavy, like a blanket thrown over a struggling sound. I called out, "Mark, are you here? I had to come home, the headache is awful." No answer. I noticed the faint, sweet smell immediately. It wasn't my usual sandalwood and vanilla blend that lingered from the morning. This was something cloying, heavy, intensely floral, a scent I recognized, but one that absolutely should not be permeating the air of our master bedroom corridor. It was Jessica's perfume. Jessica, our neighbor, my confidant, the woman I had just shared a glass of wine with last Tuesday, discussing Mark's upcoming promotion and my new landscaping plans. My feet moved automatically toward the staircase. Every step was deliberate, an agonizing ascent into the unknown. The pounding in my head was now competing with the frantic thumping in my chest, a primal drumbeat signaling danger. Stop it, Sarah. Be rational. Maybe Jessica needed to borrow a tool. Maybe she dropped off a package. Lies, desperate and weak, trying to hold back the tidal wave of dread. As I reached the landing, the door to our bedroom, the door that was always closed for privacy, was slightly ajar. A sliver of golden afternoon light escaped, and with it, a low, indistinct sound. It wasn't conversation. It was a rhythmic murmur, muffled but unmistakable. My breath caught, freezing in my throat. The migraine vanished, replaced by a crystalline clarity, the terrifying focus that only disaster grants you. I didn't knock. I didn't hesitate. I pushed the door open the rest of the way. The world collapsed into a single, devastating snapshot of domestic wreckage. There he was. My husband, Mark, the man whose hand I held every night, tangled in the sheets of our bed. And there, beside him, was Jessica. Her bright auburn hair was a shocking splash against my pale blue duvet. The room felt hot, messy, reeking of sweat, and that damnable cheap floral perfume. It was the absolute, undeniable, repulsive reality of betrayal laid bare on my marital bed. The shock was a physical blow, a vacuum that sucked the air from my lungs and emptied my mind of every thought, except the cold, hard need for control. But I did not scream. I did not cry. My reaction was not emotional. It was clinical, purely strategic. The Sarah who loved Mark and trusted Jessica ceased to exist in that moment. A new entity, cold and calculating, took over. My hand went automatically to the smartphone in my jeans pocket. I pulled it out silently, switched the camera to video mode, and without making a sound, I held it steady, framing the image perfectly. I took 3 slow steps into the room, ensuring the angle was indisputable, capturing both of them clearly, their faces contorting from guilty pleasure into absolute horror as they finally registered my presence. Mark's eyes were wide, panicked, searching for an excuse that hadn't been invented yet. Jessica just covered her face, a pathetic, muffled sob escaping her. I held the phone steady for a full 20 seconds, documenting the evidence I knew they would later try to deny or minimize. I didn't need their clumsy apologies or their pathetic lies. I had the truth, recorded and time-stamped. I turned off the recording. Still silent, I backed out of the room, my gaze never leaving their terrified faces. When I reached the door frame, I didn't just close the door. I reached up and twisted the small, rarely used locking mechanism on the interior handle, the one meant for privacy, not for imprisonment. Click. I heard Mark shout my name, a choked, frantic sound, followed by the violent rattling of the handle. But I was already descending the stairs. I wasn't running away. I was securing my future. I strode straight to the kitchen drawer where we kept the spare keys and grabbed Mark's set, along with my wallet. Then, I sat down at the granite countertop, pulled up the contact labeled Liam Henderson, Jessica's partner, and punched the call button. My voice, when Liam answered, was steady, smooth, and dangerously calm. "Liam," I said, leaning back against the cold stone, the frantic banging from upstairs now a distant, irrelevant noise. "It's Sarah. I have some terrible news about Jessica. And I need you to know I have proof. Bring your house keys. I've just filed for divorce, and we need to exchange some locks today. The migraine hit like a physical blow right after my 2 p.m. meeting. It wasn't just a headache. It was a debilitating, blinding pulse behind my eyes that made focusing on the spreadsheet, much less the negotiations scheduled for later, utterly impossible. I told my assistant, Marie, I was heading home to take the heavy-duty medication and sleep it off. No one questioned it. I was Sarah, the diligent partner, the one who never took a sick day. The last thing I expected was to drive 30 minutes out of downtown Chicago and walk straight into the meticulously curated crime scene of my own life. Pulling my black SUV into the 3-car garage felt immediately wrong. Mark's sleek black sedan was parked next to my side, occupying his usual spot. I checked my watch. 3:15 p.m. He always scheduled his major calls for the late afternoon, often not leaving his firm until well after 6. Why was he here? Maybe he had a meeting canceled, or maybe he was taking a conference call from the home office. I tried to dismiss the flicker of unease, rationalizing everything as I walked through the quiet kitchen, dropping my briefcase onto the expansive marble island. That's when I smelled it. It wasn't Mark's usual expensive woody cologne. It was Jessica's. That distinct, overwhelming tuberose and sandalwood scent she insisted on wearing. The one she swore was exclusive and cost a fortune. It hung heavy in the air, a cloying, chemical cloud of intrusion that made my stomach clench tighter than the headache ever could. Jessica, my neighbor, my confidant, the woman who had helped me pick out the wallpaper in this very kitchen. The house was silent, unnaturally so. Usually the automated system played soft jazz in the afternoons. Now nothing, just the deafening sound of my own rising heartbeat. I didn't call his name. I didn't want to alert them, whoever them might be. I climbed the oak staircase, each step amplifying the sudden cold realization that something was terribly, fundamentally wrong. I wasn't feeling anger yet, just a terrifying clinical dread. The instinct of a lawyer walking into a court case she knows she's about to win, but wishes she never had to file. I stopped outside our master bedroom door. It was slightly ajar, the gap just enough for a sliver of light to escape. I heard a low, throaty murmur, not Mark's usual booming, authoritative voice, but a soft, indulgent tone I hadn't heard directed at me in months, maybe years. I didn't knock. My hand didn't tremble. I simply pushed the heavy walnut door open the rest of the way, stepping soundlessly onto the thick Persian rug. They didn't hear me. They were too preoccupied, too careless, too entitled. Mark was facing the window, and Jessica was close enough to him that their silhouettes blurred into one ugly, intertwined shape. The world didn't stop. If anything, it sped up. My eyes instantly cataloged the details. The afternoon light hitting the gold wedding band on Mark's hand, the specific pattern of Jessica's silk dress draped carelessly over the chaise lounge, the predatory, familiar look on her face as she rested her head on his shoulder. For a split second, she looked up, recognizing the sudden shift in the air pressure, and that look of smug recognition froze on her face. But before she could scream, before Mark could spin around and hide his shame, I had my phone out of my handbag. Hysteria is a luxury I could not afford. I was a partner at a law firm. I dealt in evidence, contracts, and strategy. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even breathe loudly. I just pointed the lens of my camera straight at them and hit the video record button. The digital click was the only sound in the room, cutting through the thick, contaminated atmosphere. "Smile, Mark," I said, my voice flat, dead, devoid of all human feeling. He finally turned, his face draining of color, scrambling to cover himself with a useless silk sheet. Jessica shrieked, stumbling backward off the bed, clutching a pillow to her chest. I kept the recording button pressed down, documenting every second of their shame, their panic, their immediate, futile attempts to pretend this wasn't happening. I backed out slowly, never breaking eye contact, ensuring the phone captured the entire room, the discarded clothes, and their undeniably exposed guilt. I closed the bedroom door, not slamming it like a dramatic heroine, but clicking the lock firmly into place. The sound echoed like a final period at the end of a long, boring sentence. Their frantic, muffled pleas and desperate knocks started filtering through the thick wood, but they were already irrelevant noise. The game was over. I walked straight past the staircase to the kitchen island, placing my phone on the granite countertop, pulled up the contact labeled Liam Henderson, Jessica's partner, and punched the call button. My voice, when Liam answered, was steady, smooth, and, dangerously calm. "Liam," I said, leaning back against the cold stone, the frantic banging from upstairs now a distant, irrelevant noise. "It's Sarah. I have some terrible news about Jessica, and I need you to know I have proof. Bring your house keys. I've just filed for divorce, and we need to exchange some locks today." The city was too loud, the seminar room too bright, and the throbbing behind my eyes was escalating from an annoyance to a blinding, debilitating siege. Tried to focus on the speaker's projected slides, but the words swam. It was a classic, brutal migraine, the kind that signals a complete system shutdown. I slipped out quietly during the mid-morning break, mumbling an apology to the organizer about a sudden family emergency. I just needed darkness, silence, and the sanctity of my own bed in our quiet Tampa suburb. The drive back felt endless, every ray of sunshine a tiny spike driven into my skull. When I finally turned onto Cypress Lane, the relief of nearing home was palpable. But then I saw it. David's black sedan, usually parked neatly in his designated spot in the garage, was sitting awkwardly half on the driveway, almost as if someone had abandoned it in a rush. My first thought was that he must have forgotten something important and rushed back, planning to leave quickly. My second thought was the sudden, oppressive silence that met me when I unlocked the front door. Our house, normally filled with the low ambient hum of a busy life, was dead quiet. Too quiet. I kicked off my shoes in the mudroom, wincing at the small noise, and walked into the kitchen, intending to grab a glass of water before collapsing upstairs. That's when the scent hit me. It wasn't the familiar clean linen and sandalwood that defined our home, nor was it the expensive vanilla perfume I always wore. This was cheap, aggressively floral and heavy, jasmine maybe, mingled with the stale musk of sweat and cheap hotel-grade lotion. It was Jessica's signature scent. My neighbor, my friend. A cold dread, far worse than the migraine, settled in my chest. David was supposed to be in meetings downtown. Jessica was supposed to be volunteering at the local shelter. The possibilities spun fast and dark, but the most hideous one felt heavy and certain, like a stone dropped into water. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, not in panic, but in a strange, slow, deliberate rhythm. I moved toward the staircase, every step a deliberate act of will. The pristine white carpet seemed to absorb the sound, and I became a shadow ascending into the light. I could hear nothing from above, only the desperate, ragged pumping of my own blood in my ears. The upstairs hallway felt different, charged with a thick, suffocating energy. The door to our master bedroom, the sanctuary we built together, the place where we planned our future, was slightly ajar, maybe just an inch, enough to let a thin sliver of light spill onto the dark wood floor. I paused outside, gripping the phone in my hand, instinctively knowing I needed a weapon greater than rage. My breath hitched, a small, painful thing trapped deep in my throat. I didn't scream. I didn't yell. I didn't even knock. I simply raised my hand and pushed the door open, slow and steady, letting the full weight of the scene fall upon me. It was exactly what the cheap perfume had promised. The sheets were thrown back in a frantic mess. David, my husband, was scrambling clumsily to cover himself, his face a mask of shock and instant, searing guilt. And Jessica. Jessica was there, in my king-sized bed, her face pale, the sight of her bare skin and my husband's naked betrayal momentarily paralyzing my nervous system. The world stopped spinning. The migraine vanished. All that remained was an absolute, terrifying clarity. My reaction was not emotional. It was clinical. The Sarah who loved David, the woman who trusted Jessica, that person was instantly incinerated, replaced by a strategist, an observer. I did not drop my purse or my car keys. I didn't blink. I simply and smoothly pulled out my phone, switched the camera to video mode, and started recording. The sound of the notification click was the only sound I allowed myself to make. They froze, their panic amplified tenfold by the sight of the glowing screen. David tried to speak, a pathetic, strangled sound of denial and plea, but I just held the phone steady, capturing their shame, their naked terror, the evidence of their filth on my white linen sheets. I filmed David's face, then Jessica's face, then the state of the room, letting the lens linger just long enough to ensure undeniable proof of coitus, the visual confirmation of their physical betrayal. I took 3 steps backward, never breaking eye contact, never letting the phone drop. I watched David reach for the bedside lamp, desperate to hide the reality, but it was too late. I had it all. When I reached the hallway, I lowered the phone, the video still running. My hand moved automatically to the doorknob. Instead of slamming it in theatrical rage, I simply turned it quietly, pulling the door shut with a soft click. The sound was deceptively final, like the snapping of a lock. I stood there for a moment, listening to the muffled, frantic whispers begin inside the room, realizing they were trapped, locked in with their disgrace. My legs carried me, stiff and unfeeling, down the stairs and back into the kitchen. I placed the phone gently on the granite countertop, the video still recording the silence of the hallway, just in case they tried to break out or destroy evidence. The coldness in my veins was exhilarating. I knew exactly what I had to do next. My betrayal was double-layered. My husband had ruined my marriage, and my neighbor had ruined my friendship, and probably her own relationship too. I reached for my phone on the granite countertop, pulled up the contact labeled Liam Henderson, Jessica's partner, and punched the call button. My voice, when Liam answered, was steady, smooth, and dangerously calm. "Liam," I said, leaning back against the cold stone, the frantic banging from upstairs now a distant, irrelevant noise. "It's Sarah. I have some terrible news about Jessica, and I need you to know I have proof. Bring your house keys. I've just filed for divorce, and we need to exchange some locks today." The meeting had been excruciating, my temples throbbing with a sudden, vicious migraine that refused to be managed by over-the-counter pills. I excused myself barely an hour into the presentation, telling my assistant I needed to retrieve an urgent client file from my home office before heading straight to the pharmacy. It was barely 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, the time of day when our quiet suburban street should have been filled only with the faint sound of lawnmowers and distant traffic. This unexpected return, driven by a blinding pain, felt like fate's crude intervention. I pulled into the driveway, frowning instantly. Mark's truck was parked slightly askew, close to the garage door. He had specifically told me he had an all-day symposium downtown. A small flicker of annoyance sparked within me. Maybe he'd forgotten an essential item and rushed back, failing to mention it. I grabbed my briefcase and stepped inside, the usual warmth of our foyer replaced by a heavy, almost expectant silence. The first thing that hit me wasn't a sound, but a smell. Jessica's sickly sweet, overpriced lilac perfume. It was strong, cloying, utterly out of place in our shared space. My breath hitched. Jessica, our neighbor, my confidant, the woman who shared my recipe for lemon bars and watched our dog when we traveled. A cold tremor ran down my spine, replacing the pain of the migraine with a sudden, icy clarity. Mark must have invited her over for a quick, innocent coffee, I tried to rationalize, but the truck in the driveway screamed intimacy, not casual acquaintance. I set my briefcase down with unnatural quiet, every muscle in my body taut. I didn't call out his name. I didn't want to hear the lie he would undoubtedly construct. I walked past the kitchen, past the den, and toward the staircase, the plush carpet muffling my steps. The silence upstairs was profound, unnatural for two people supposedly just having coffee. It was the silence of intense focus, of secrecy. I reached the top of the landing. The master bedroom door, our door, the sanctuary of our 12 years together, was slightly ajar, maybe a couple of inches. Enough to see a slice of the room. Enough to hear the low, rhythmic sigh that wasn't mine. My heart didn't race. It seemed to stop entirely, lodged somewhere painfully beneath my ribs. I edged closer, moving with the precision of a predator, not a victim. I pushed the door open just wide enough to confirm the horror, and then time fractured. There they were, Mark and Jessica. Not just talking, not just hugging, but intertwined on the precise center of our bed. The silk duvet I had bought in Milan pooled around their ankles. He was laughing, a sound I had always associated with genuine joy, now tainted, mocking me from across the room. She was looking up at him, her hand resting against his cheek, an expression of proprietary comfort on her face that belonged only to me. It was the terrifying familiarity of the betrayal that struck me hardest. The casualness. The fact that they had clearly done this many times, right here, in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, believing themselves completely safe. It wasn't a flash of blinding rage. It was a profound, suffocating sense of nothingness, the instantaneous death of a decade of trust. I didn't scream. I didn't drop the briefcase. I didn't even shed a tear. The Sarah who had walked into that house 20 minutes earlier was instantaneously incinerated, replaced by someone cold, someone calculating, someone who understood that emotion was a vulnerability I could no longer afford. My hands moved automatically. I pulled out my phone, unlocked the camera, and began filming. I captured the state of the room, their faces, the distinct mole on Jessica's shoulder, the personalized cufflinks Mark was still wearing, irrefutable evidence. I filmed until they finally noticed the sudden, sharp intake of air I couldn't completely suppress. Their heads snapped toward the door in unison, their expressions shifting from lust to pure, unadulterated terror. I lowered the phone but kept the recording running. I met Mark's eyes, and I saw his shame. But even more, clearly, I saw the instant scramble for a lie. I didn't utter a single word. I simply took 2 steps back, closed the bedroom door firmly, but quietly, and clicked the deadbolt lock. They were trapped. Not physically, not yet, but mentally. They knew I had the footage, and they were momentarily paralyzed inside that room of shattered promises. I walked back down the stairs, retrieved my briefcase, and headed straight to the kitchen island. I needed to act fast, legally and strategically. The next call wasn't to my lawyer. The next call was to the person who deserved to witness the absolute fallout of Jessica's treachery. I needed an ally, and I knew exactly who held the other half of this broken equation. I placed my phone flat on the cool granite countertop, pulled up the contact labeled Liam Henderson, Jessica's partner, and punched the call button. My voice, when Liam answered, was steady, smooth, and dangerously calm. "Liam," I said, leaning back against the cold stone, the frantic banging from upstairs now a distant, irrelevant noise. "It's Sarah. I have some terrible news about Jessica, and I need you to know I have proof." Bring your house keys. I've just filed for divorce, and we need to exchange some locks today. My voice, when Liam answered, was steady, smooth, and dangerously calm. Liam, I said, leaning back against the cold stone, the frantic banging from upstairs now a distant, irrelevant noise. It's Sarah. I have some terrible news about Jessica, and I need you to know I have proof. Bring your house keys. I've just filed for divorce, and we need to exchange some locks today. I hung up before he could process the shock, leaving him with only the echo of my absolute certainty. I knew he was on his way. The devastation in his silence told me everything I needed to know. While I waited, I didn't waste a second. The cell phone I had confiscated from my husband lay on the counter. I bypassed the facial recognition with a photo I already had and dove into the abyss. This was the part that truly hollowed me out. Not the sight of them, but the casual cruelty documented in their digital history. Scrolling back, the timeline stretched not for weeks, but for years. They hadn't just been sneaking around. They had been building a parallel life right under my nose, a cruel little theater where I was the oblivious fool. I found pictures, not explicit ones, but photos of them laughing in places we had gone together, secret trips they had taken while telling us both they were on business or family errands. But the worst discovery was the messaging thread, where they didn't just discuss logistics, they discussed me. They had nicknames for me. They mocked my attempts to plan our future, my trust, and my absolute faith in our marriage. She's so predictable, one message read, followed by a laughing emoji from Jessica. The sheer debasement of seeing my love reduced to a running joke, a trivial obstacle in their selfish pursuit, was colder than any physical betrayal. That moment, holding the glowing screen, was the final severance. The tears I had suppressed earlier finally threatened to spill, but I held them in check. I wasn't going to cry over their mockery. I was going to use it. When Liam arrived 20 minutes later, his face was gray, a mirror image of the shock I had felt an hour earlier. I didn't say a word. I simply pointed to the kitchen counter where the phone lay open, displaying a message exchange discussing how they would spend Christmas together next year, in a future they were planning to force. He barely skimmed the texts before his body slumped against the doorway. "They're upstairs," I stated, my voice echoing slightly in the sudden quiet. "I've filed for immediate dissolution and injunction. They are trespassing. I need you to witness their removal." The banging had stopped. They knew the game was up. I walked slowly to the foot of the stairs, the phone in my hand now recording video, and simply called out, "Mark, Jessica, Liam is here. You have 10 minutes to collect what you need to leave. If you are not out, the police will remove you." They stumbled down the stairs, their faces blotchy and panicked. They hadn't expected the immediate surgical strike. They had expected screaming, broken dishes, and perhaps a chance to negotiate from a position of false remorse. They found a stone wall instead. "Sarah, please," Mark began, reaching for my arm. He tried the familiar, pleading tone. "It was just a mistake. It didn't mean anything. We were just lonely." I finished for him, holding up the phone, still recording. "You were planning a life, Mark, for years. You mocked my grief and my loyalty. Everything you are saying now is being recorded. Do not lie to me again." Jessica started crying, a theatrical sob that instantly failed to move me. "We can explain, Liam. Sarah, please. It was only physical. It was a lapse." Liam, finding a strength I hadn't expected, stepped forward. "A lapse doesn't last 2 years, Jessica. A lapse doesn't involve planning my divorce for me." He looked at my husband, his eyes dead. "You two are truly disgusting." I handed Mark a sealed envelope. "That is from my attorney. It contains the restraining order, the temporary residency ruling, and the non-disclosure agreement. You are banned from this property, effective immediately. Liam and I will change the locks now. Whatever you leave behind will be boxed and stored at a facility that you will be charged for. The humiliation was palpable. They had lost control of the narrative, the house, and their comfort. They scrambled, grabbing cheap duffel bags, throwing clothes inside haphazardly. Their hurried, pathetic exit, shadowed by the two of us. Standing guard was the final scene of that awful chapter. They walked out of the door, not as passionate lovers, but as disgraced thieves caught red-handed, leaving behind only the bitter smell of cheap perfume and betrayal. The house felt instantly lighter, cleaner, the moment the heavy oak door closed behind them. Liam and I exchanged locks swiftly, silently, sealing the fortress. We then sat in the kitchen, two survivors of the same bomb blast, and began the painful, necessary work of dividing two shared lives that were never truly meant to be intertwined. The months that followed were not easy, but they were unequivocally mine. I didn't just divorce Mark. I divorced the person I had become while married to him. I traveled to places he always postponed visiting. I started painting again, a passion I had suppressed for years. I renovated the entire house, tearing down the wall that separated my kitchen from the living room, effectively erasing the stage where their final act had played out. I didn't try to hide my past. I simply rebuilt my present on top of it, stronger and entirely self-sufficient. Then, 6 months later, it happened. I was downtown in Chicago, leaving a new architecture firm I was consulting with, feeling sharp and confident in a tailored suit. I turned a corner, heading toward the parking garage, and there he was. Mark. He was standing outside a cramped, slightly dilapidated office building, looking older, smaller, and undeniably tired. His suit looked cheap, wrinkled at the shoulder, and his hair was thinner. He was laughing nervously with a woman, a new woman, younger, dressed in bright, tight clothes that screamed desperation. He caught my eye. His smile instantly died. The shock on his face was a mixture of guilt and lingering possessiveness. I didn't stop. I didn't flinch. I didn't even slow down. The most profound realization of my healing wasn't anger or vengeance. It was the absolute, total indifference that washed over me. He was nothing. An old coat I had discarded. I felt no pain, no hatred, only a vague academic pity for the man who had lost everything for a cheap, years-long thrill, and for the woman now standing next to him, who clearly didn't know his capacity for deceit. I simply lifted my chin, gave him the briefest nod of recognition, the way you acknowledge a distant, irrelevant acquaintance, and walked, straight past him into my new, expansive future. He stood frozen, watching me go, realizing what he had truly forfeited. If you are listening to this, and you are currently standing in the wreckage of your own betrayal, I want you to understand one thing. They steal your peace, but they can never steal your power. The moment you decide to stop reacting and start executing your plan, you reclaim your life. Betrayal is a devastating end to a relationship, but it can be the most powerful, necessary beginning of your true self. Do not shrink. Do not beg. Become strategic, become silent, and become the most formidable force they have ever encountered. Your victory is not in making them suffer. Your victory is in thriving so magnificently that their existence becomes utterly irrelevant to yours. If this story resonated with you, if you found strength in my journey, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments below, what city are you listening from? And what is the one piece of advice you'd give to someone facing the ultimate betrayal? Let's build this community of resilience together.